Okay, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning Torah study and we are glad to be here with you today. Before I get started in the class, I did want to make a couple of announcements. I wanted to remind people to sign up for our United Israel Bulletin if you've not yet done so. And just to kind of give you the highlights of what was in this latest edition, because I think we're doing our best to supply a little bit of information and kind of keep people posted generally on what's going on in United Israel. So if you haven't subscribed, you can go to unitedisrael.org, look in the right-hand column, and there's a place to sign up. You simply put your name, your email address, click the button, and you're in. Now, just know that we don't give your email addresses away. We only use it for sending out our notices, our bulletins, information, things of that nature. So we do not sign people up. So if you're on that at some point, either you had more wine than you thought, you signed up late at night, you were tired, we did not add your email address, and we won't do it now. So if you'd like to be receiving, or if you'd like to receive the United Israel Bulletin, please sign up for that. In the latest edition, I did write a brief article and provide the link to the next upcoming Tabor Nichols Israel Tour 2018, begins March the 2nd. There is an extension on this tour. Presently, we're planning to go to Jordan after the initial tour of Israel. So that's optional. People don't have to do that. The tour is going to be based on our other successful tours. I believe that James and I have both, we've co-led 5 tours to Israel. Obviously, James has been there many times. I've been there several other times, but just not on a tour with James. So we've sort of got this thing down. So if you're interested in touring Israel and you want to see sites associated with both the Hebrew Bible and a historical view of the New Testament, then this is the tour for you. I also put an article that I entitled Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem. Many of you are quite aware, some of you may not be, but I'll just say that on July the 14th, there were some terrorists who shot and killed 2 Druze Israeli police officers. They ran back onto the Temple Mount, and what followed has led to a very tense situation. The police followed them back onto the Temple Mount. They actually killed the terrorist. And so now Israel, following that, shut down access to the Temple Mount temporarily. They installed metal detectors, and as you have probably seen on the news, if you've gotten past the very interesting story about O.J. Simpson out of jail, and they've actually only shown a little bit of this, but now there is a very tense situation because many of the Arab leaders are telling the worshipers not to go on the Temple Mount until they remove those metal detectors. So they're praying in the street. There have been days of clashes between Muslims and the police. So please pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This situation seems to be pretty tense, and we're told in Psalm 122 to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So please do that. I also put on there hot links to get you to Ralph Bunton's 2 series that he writes. Number 1 is Remembering David Horowitz, and then the other is Portraits of the Past. Both of those are very interesting. They're among our most popular featured articles and pages on our website, so please check that out. I did include also a greeting from Oklahoma. A friend of ours by the name of Cheryl McWilliams wrote in and sent a picture and greeted us from Oklahoma, and I thought, I love this because it's very much like the old bulletins from the 40s and 50s and beyond, where there was this interaction between the people who were scattered all over the place and the readership. So I kind of want to do that. So if people want to send in a greeting, or things for possible inclusion into the bulletin, please do so. And I will consider putting things in from time to time from our readers. I also put a link to our latest Israel on My Mind show, the show that I do with Jono. It's a light and humorous look at things going on in Israel and related to Israel and the Jewish people. And then finally, I closed out the newsletter with a note that's always in there. It's a featured part that I put in called From the Torah. And from the Torah, what I do is I tell you what the reading is for those who are following the annual cycle of readings, as well as where we're at in our current studies. So for those who are following the annual cycle of readings, some of you do this study, but you also follow the annual cycle. This week in the annual cycle, it's a combined reading. It's got matot and maseh. Both of these Torah portions occur towards the end of the book of Numbers, from chapter 30, verse 2, through chapter 36, verse 13. So, matot and maseh. But we are going through, according to the triennial cycle of readings. We are presently, as we have been for quite some time, we are still in the patriarchal period, and we're in the life of Jacob. Now, last week I talked about how this week would be a continuation from last week's class. So last week's class I entitled The Return of Jacob, and this one will be part 2, The Return of Jacob, part 2. And one of the things that I stressed was that we're looking at things from a historical, textual standpoint. In other words, this is the actual physical record of Jacob returning from his exile. But what I ask you to do, and what I'm going to stress a little bit more today, is to look at this in a little bit different way. So we're talking about the story of the patriarch's journey to the land promised by an oath, his return from exile. But seemingly, what we get in this story, and last week, and this week, and even beyond, we seem to see something in the text which points beyond to, let's say, a greater Jacob. By greater Jacob, I mean the seed of the famed father. All right? So, the seed of the famed father. This is a record of Jacob. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the patriarch Jacob, but I'm going to be commenting on and providing commentary as we go, tying in some prophetic text and so forth, which indicate that this might be also a way to understand the redemption of Jacob's seed. Hosea, the prophet, makes this point plainly in a very interesting prophecy. I'm not going to read the entire prophecy, but the prophecy to which I refer begins in Hosea chapter 12, verse 1, and we don't hit a white space again until we get to chapter 13, verse 11. So Hosea gives this prophecy beginning in Hosea chapter 12, 1, and it flows all the way until you get to 13:11. Now, in most English Bibles, this is not evident. These white spaces in most English Bibles aren't obvious. Some people will write me and ask me what translation I use or what Bible I carry. The one that I like the most in terms of the Hebrew Bible is put out by Koren, Koren, Koren Publishers in Jerusalem. And this particular Bible has the white spaces in it. It's called the Koren Tanakh. And later today, when I post this on my website, I'll put a link so that you can find it on Amazon or your favorite bookseller. But it's got the Jerusalem Bible edition of the Torah and Tanakh. Mine has thumb indexes and color maps and a beautiful cover that I had put on special. Yours won't be as beautiful as mine, so just get over it. But you can have basically the same Bible for a lot less money, let's say. Hosea chapter 12, though. Hosea, a prophet to the northern kingdom. So we have in biblical prophecy, we have in biblical history, the division of Israel into, for all intents and purposes, two kingdoms. The kingdom in the north representing, loosely representing the 10 tribes, although there's some crossover between the tribes. It's not clearly demarked in that easy fashion. And then in the south we have Judah, the house of Judah, which is represented primarily by Judah, Benjamin, and some of Levi. All right. Hosea is a prophet to the northern kingdom. And what he does in this prophecy in chapter 12 is quite interesting. Hosea weaves his present. In other words, if you read 12:1 through 13:11 and beyond, but this is where I'm talking particularly right now, he weaves his present day with ancient times and also refers to a time yet to come. All right, so it's a mixture. In one sentence, in one pasuk, one verse, he's talking about present day in his time. In another passage, in a continuous narrative, he might refer back to ancient times and then quite immediately begin to talk about what is to come in days way down the road. He addresses, interestingly enough, the entire family, the whole family of Israel in all its divisions. Remember, Amos, who is also a prophet to the northern kingdom, says, Amos says, "You alone have I known of all the families of the earth," talking to Israel. Within Israel, you have these different divisions. You have Ephraim, you have Judah, you have Jerusalem, you have all these different groupings within the family. Hosea addresses them all, distinguishing carefully between them. At times, he points to the sins of one, and then almost in the same breath will switch and speak about or point to the sins of the other group, of the other house, if you will. And yet the whole time, Hosea anticipates a glorious future, but he doesn't ignore the painful past and what was in his day a grievous present. So he's trying to weave. I want you to get that this passage is jam-packed. He's bouncing all over in some ways, talking about the different groups, the past, the present, the future. But within that, we're going to see something quite amazing. Also, I should point out that Hosea highlights the sins of Israel, but at the same time, he charts, if you will, a course for the restoration, and he does that at times by referring or pointing us back to previous deliverances, all of which he presents around details that are found in the story of Jacob, which we're reading now. Now, I've touched on a part of this in the previous two classes, but I want us to go to Hosea chapter 12, and I want to begin reading in verse 3. Hosea chapter 12, verse 3. It says, Yehovah has also a controversy with Yehudah. Notice, he's focusing on Judah. And will punish Yaakov, which is Jacob, according to his ways. Now, a lot of people try to make excuses for the patriarchs and cover up their failings, but the thing that I love about the Hebrew Bible is that the Hebrew Bible writers don't do this. They don't make excuses, they don't cover up. He's going to punish Yaakov according to his ways, according to his doings will he recompense him. And then it says this, he took his brother's heel in the womb, and by his strength he strove with God. He strove with an angel and prevailed. He wept, made supplication to him. He would find him in Bethel, and there he would speak with us. But Jehovah is the God of hosts. Jehovah is his name. Now, if you look down at verse 13, now this is, by the way, between where I left off in verse 7. He goes in verse 7, he begins to address the present group. He begins to talk about Ephraim and Ephraim's sin and so forth. And when you get down to verse 13, it says, and Yaakov fled into the country of Aram, and Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he kept sheep. See how it refers back to our story in Genesis? And then immediately, look, just to give you a taste, then immediately he says, and by a prophet Jehovah brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. Ephraim provoked him to anger most bitterly. But see, what I want you to see is that this prophet Hosea is weaving together ancient, the present, a charted course for the future, all of which he puts into this commentary, if you will, about Israel past, about the patriarch. He mentions that he grabbed his brother's heel in the womb. He's the heel grabber, Yaakov, the one who heals. It's H-E-E-L-S, not H-E-A-L-S, which is what we want Yaakov to be, is that healer. But he is one who grabs the heel. It says, interestingly enough, here in Hosea 12, that he strove with an angel, a malach. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to go into some great detail because that's in our reading today. It says that he wept and that he made supplication. And then the passage that I brought up in the previous weeks that I want to stress again says he found him at Bethel, and there he spoke with us. So what this prophet Hosea is telling us is that it's not just an artistic license that he's taking by looking at this ancient story and talking about the sins of the present and the glorious future, but he's using it to be very illustrative of a point, and that is that what happened to the patriarch should be a sign of what's to happen to the descendants. You see that? There he spoke with us. There's this curious reference here in the Hebrew. It says, Yehovah, but Yehovah Elohei Hatzavaot, Yehovah Zikro. When it's talking in context, it says he strove with an angel and wept and made supplication. There he would speak with us. Then the very next line says, Yehovah Elohei Hatzavaot, Yehovah Zikro, means Yehovah, God of the host, Yehovah is his name or his memorial. So this indicates, at least as it reads, that the one with whom he wrestles is what we just said. Now, I know people who would say that is not right, that cannot be right because no man can see me and live, and they get all these verses. Relax. Stay with me. Hosea chapter 12 says that he wrestles with a malach. Now, the malach is a very mysterious figure in the Hebrew Bible. It occurs quite frequently throughout the biblical text. Remember, in our early chapters of Genesis, the only one who has wrestled or seen or talked with or encountered, let's say, the malach was Hagar. Remember, Hagar in chapter 16 and chapter 23. Hagar sees the malach. No one else, just Hagar. Now, but Hosea indicates to us that the one with whom he wrestles is the malach. Now, we'll go into that in a little while in our class. I have a question that I will ask you before I read the text based on what I've just covered. What can we see and hear from the patriarch's story? How much can we glean from the story? Hosea seems to glean quite a bit. Can we see and hear the present in the words of an ancient story? Psalm 119:18 says, Gal einai va'avita niflaot mitorateka. Open my eyes, and I will look for wonderful things in your Torah. Now, I wanted to highlight something before I begin reading from our passage today. We'll be reading from Genesis chapter 32, verse 3 in the English, verse 4 if you're reading a Hebrew Bible. There is a slight verse difference. If you've downloaded the file from the Transparent English Bible, you'll see that James Tabor has indicated that so that you can see that 3, which is the verse for it in the English Bible, right next to it you'll see 4 in brackets. That indicates that according to the Hebrew there's a verse difference. Okay, so without further ado, we will begin to read our portion today from the triennial portion according to the Transparent English Bible. And Jacob sent messengers before his face toward Esau, his brother, toward the land of Seir, the field of Edom, and charged them, saying, Thus say to my master, to Esau, Thus said your servant Yaakov, With Laban I have sojourned, and I have delayed until now. And there is to me ox and donkey, flock and servant and house servant, and I will send to tell my master to find favor in your eyes. And the messengers returned toward Jacob, saying, We came toward your brother, toward Esau, and he also is walking to meet you, and 400 men with him. He's not coming alone. And Jacob feared exceedingly and was bound up. And he divided the people who were with him and the flock and the herd and the camels into 2 camps. If I were you, I would slightly underline that if you make such careful markings in your Bible. 2 camps. And he said, If Esau comes toward one camp and strikes it, and the camp, the one being left, is for an escape. And Jacob said, O Elohim of my father Abraham, the Elohim of my father Isaac, Jehovah, the one saying toward me, Return to your land, and to those brought forth of yours, and I will cause good with you. I was small from all the loyal kindness and from all the trustfulness that you've done with your servant. For with my rod I passed over this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Cause me to be torn away, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and strike me, a mother upon sons. And you have said, Doing good, I will surely do good with you, and I will place your seed as the sand of the sea that is not counted from abundance. And he lodged there in the night, and he took from that coming in his hand a present for Esau his brother, female goats, a pair, 100, and male goats, 20, ewes, a pair, 100, and rams, 20, camels causing to suck in their sons, 30, cows, 40, and bulls, 10, female donkeys, 20, male donkeys, 10. And he gave into the hand of his servants drove by itself, and said toward his servants, pass over before my face, and place a space between herd and between herd. And he charged the first, saying, when my brother Esau encounters you, and asks you, saying, to whom are you, and where are you walking? And to whom are these before your face? And you will say, to your servant, to Jacob, it is a present being sent to my master, to Esau, and look, he also is behind us. And he charged also the second, also the third, also all those walking after the droves, saying, according to this spoken thing, you will speak toward Esau in your finding him, and you will also say, look, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease his face with the present that walks before my face, and after I will see his face, perhaps he will lift my face. We're going to talk about that. Notice the repetition of the word face over and over. And the present passed over upon his face. And he lodged that night in the camp, and he rose in that night and took his 2 women and his 2 household servants, and his 11 brought forth ones, and passed over the passing over of Yavok, or the Jabbok. And he took them and caused them to pass over the wadi, and he caused to pass over that which was to him. And Jacob remained alone, and a man, notice, a man wrestled with him until the going up of the dawn. And he saw that he was not able against him. He touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of the thigh of Jacob was hanging in his wrestling with him. And he said, send me away, for the dawn has gone up. And he said, I will not send you away, except indeed you bless me. And he said toward him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name will not still be called Jacob, but indeed Israel. For you have had power with Elohim and with men, and have been able. And Jacob asked and said, tell please your name. And he said, why is this you asked for my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen Elohim face toward face, and my life breath was torn away. And the sun rose on him as he passed over Penuel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore the sons of Israel do not eat the tendon of the vein that is on the hollow of the thigh until this day, because he touched the hollow of the thigh of Jacob at the tendon of the vein. And Jacob lifted his eyes and saw, and look, Esau was coming, and with him 400 men, and he divided the ones brought forth to Leah and to Rachel and to the 2 house servants. And he placed the house servants and their ones brought forth first, and Leah and her ones brought forth last, and Rachel and Joseph last. See the order? It means, in other words, after and then finally. And he passed over before their face and bowed himself down toward the land 7 times until he drew near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him. Had to be a little nerve-wracking, by the way. Enfolded him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and the brought forth ones, and said, who are these to you? And he said, the ones brought forth with whom Elohim has favored your servant. And the house servants drew near, they with their ones brought forth, and bowed themselves down. And Leah also drew near, and her ones brought forth, and they bowed themselves down. And after Joseph drew near, and Rachel, and they bowed themselves down. And he said, who is to you all this camp that I've encountered? And he said, to find favor in the sight of my master. And Esau said, there is to me abundant, my brother. Let it be to you what is to you. Jacob said, "No, please, if please, I have found favor in your eyes, and you received my present from my hand, because therefore I have seen your face as seeing the face of the Elohim, and you are pleased with me. Take, please, my blessing that has been caused to come to you, because Elohim has favored me, and because there is to me everything." And he pressed him, and he took. And he said, "Let us pull up stakes and walk, and I will walk before you." And he said toward him, "My master knows that the ones brought forth are tender, and the flock and herd giving suck are upon me. And if they're beaten one day, all the flock will die. Let my master please pass over before my face, or before the face of his servant, and I will cause him to be led on according to my gentle way, according to the foot of the work that is before my face, and to the foot of the ones brought forth, until I come toward my master, Seir words." And Esau said, "Let me, please, put with you from the people who are with me." And he said, "Why this? Let me find favor in the eyes of my master." And Esau returned on that day on his way Seirward, and Jacob pulled up stakes towards Sukkot and built to himself a house, and for his acquired livestock made shelters. Therefore the place is called Sukkot. All right. Now, interesting story. We get the image of Jacob's return. As he comes back, he is anxious. He is very much aware of the way things were between he and his brother. He's coming back a very humble person. And we'll talk about this. He's coming back presenting gifts, and he's hoping that these gifts will be accepted, but he's a little fearful when he hears Esau's coming to you, and by the way, he's got 400 men with him. So this is not sounding good, all right? What we're going to do is I'm going to go back, and I'm going to pick things up at the beginning of this reading. Actually, what I would like to do is read the last couple of verses of last week's portion. So if you'll go with me to chapter 32 and look at verse 1 and 2. 32, 1 and 2. "And Yaakov went on his way, and angels of God met him," is the way it's translated. It's Malachei Elohim, messengers of Elohim met him. "And when Yaakov saw them, he said, 'This is God's camp,' and he called the name of that place Mahanaim." Mahanaim. So he says when he sees this. Now, the question becomes, are these angels that he sees, like with wings and a halo? And what we get in the text is not a definite yes to that. In other words, the word can simply mean one who brings a message. It doesn't have to be this divinely sent heavenly being. Having said that, he ascribes some pretty nice words to this place. He calls this place Machneh Elohim, the camp of God. So, the reader is left to ponder. Is it a band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home, as the old hymn says, or is it a group of messengers? We don't know. What we do know is that beginning this week, immediately after the white space, after verse 2, verse 3 says what? Vayishlach Yaakov Malakim, and Jacob sent messengers. Now, it's the same root word, so we have to wonder: if the one mentioned previously is an angel, then does he send angels? In other words, you can translate it messengers, and you're good either way. So messengers come in verse 1 and 2, and he calls it the camp of God. And then he sends messengers. So the question becomes, what messengers does he send? Reading today begins with this sending of messengers before his face to his brother Esau. And again, the point is that they're both from the same root word. But at any rate, one of the things that I want to stress, because it's going to tie into our picture, is that he called at the end of last week's class this place Machanaim, which means two camps, or twin camps, if you will, because Machne is the word for camp, an encampment. When you say Machanaim, it's that word in the dual. There is a way to say it in the plural, but Naim is the way that this word is made in the dual. So it's suggesting that there are two camps here. And as you recall in the story, that is one of those very interesting pieces that we see running throughout the text, is that there are these two camps. Okay, so we're gonna look at that. Jacob's return to the land. Several things stand out in my mind when I think about this. Number one, he, as you recall from last week, he heard from God that it was time to go home. He then convinced his women that it was time to leave. And everything indicated that the time was right and that it was God ordained for him to go back to the place that was destined to be his. All right? Now, he seeks acceptance. He seeks forgiveness from his brother. He comes back. His return is marked by emotion and by humility. He's looking to make things right with his estranged brother. All right, so as he journeys home, this is one of the things that I think is very important. When he left to go to Padan Aram, he left with the birthright and the blessing, and with Esau breathing threats about killing him. So he left with those things. Now, he's coming back now, not knowing what to expect. Now, you know he heard the voice that said, go back. So maybe he's hopeful that God will protect him. Remember in Genesis 28 when he has this dream, if you go with me, if you take care of me, if you bring me back to this place. So he kind of makes this covenant with God, this deal, this pact with God that says, if, then I'll serve you, you'll be my God, and so forth. So quite possibly, Yaakov has confidence that God is going to safely bring him back to the place. But it is very obvious in the text that while he might be confident in God fulfilling his word, it says in the text, he's exceedingly afraid, and what the Hebrew says, bound up. So you have to understand that he's a wreck. Jacob is so uncertain about what's going to happen. The messengers come back and they say, your brother's coming, and he's got 400 men with him. And he's just, it says he's exceedingly afraid and bound up. And then it says that he does something. He divides his entourage, if you will, into two camps. All right? And he puts the animals, and, he puts certain number of donkeys here, certain number of donkeys here, certain camels, certain people, certain people. He divides it into two. And why does he do that? You remember why he does that? If you look at verse 9, it says very clearly, Yaakov said, I'm looking. No, I don't want to read the prayer yet. Okay, verse 7 in the Hebrew. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people that were with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels into 2 camps. And he said, if Esau come to the one camp and smite it, then the camp which is left shall escape. See? So his thinking is, if he's going to be conquered, it's not going to be all at once. He's going to sort of have, and you can bet which group is going to be protected in this, right? Whichever group, you want to be in the group that Rachel and Joseph are in. I can tell you that. If you start seeing Jacob and he's going, you here, you're like, oh, please give me Rachel's group. And you're like, oh, if I'm not in Rachel's group. Now, so here, after he shuttles the family across, it says that he's left alone and he prays. I want to read this prayer to you, and I want to cover a little bit about this prayer. Let me look back at one point. Okay. Now, we're going to begin in verse 10. Verse 9 in the Hebrew. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, Jehovah, who did say to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will dwell with you. I am unworthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become 2 camps. Now, in Hebrew, that phrase is lisnei machnot, become for 2 camps. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and smite me, the mother with the children. And you did say, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed like the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. He calls out to God. From the patriarch's standpoint, without looking into any types or pictures or prophetic significance, if you just look at the patriarch, he is crying out for protection. He basically has just said that if Esau attacks one group and, then the other will escape. So then he calls out to the God of his fathers, and he reminds God, you did call me to return. You told me to come back. Right? Now he already knows Esau's coming in. He said, you told me to come, and you said, I will dwell with you. So he's reminding God that he said to go back and that he would be with him. And then he says, and I'm not even worthy of all this. So Jacob wants to get that on the record. I know I'm not worthy of it, but you did say it. And he goes in to talk about and give credit to God. He said, when I left, all I had was this staff. And now I come back, and I'm in 2 camps. All right? Now, I want to touch on this towards the end of the class today, but I do think this has significance beyond the life of Jacob, the patriarch. But I will say this. In the text, in this prayer, he says, this, I will do good with you, where he says, God, you said I'll do good with you. It's mentioned twice, both times in this prayer. We don't have the evidence in the text where God said this to Jacob. But I encourage you to do a study on that it will go well with you, this idea. God says this to the people of Israel all the time. So Jacob has heard this message that I'll do good to you, and he repeats it for us here. Now, in verse 21, just because I mentioned it as I read through, you remember this repetition of the phrase face over and over and over and over. It's this 5 times in this passage it mentions face. Go before the face and so forth. And then the idea that I think is being conveyed, because face occurs over and over and over in this particular passage, in this particular story, it's almost as if to say that Jacob must face his toughest fight yet. We've got some things in front of Jacob's face here, and when you read the Hebrew root word paneh over and over and over, face, 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 and a face, and his face, and he'll present this before him. Anytime you see before him, generally in Hebrew, it's lifnai something. It has to do with the root word face. Jacob is going to have to face his own made problems that he's made for himself in life. Jacob has to face his past. And then in the narrative, by the time we get to chapter 33 and verse 10, the word face is used in an interesting way. He actually tells Esau. He tells Esau in chapter 33:10, Jacob said, "By no means, if now I have found favor in your sight, then receive my present at my hand, for I have seen your face, as though I had seen the face of an angel, and you were pleased with me." When he faces his past. Now, right before this, remember, he does have the struggle with one that Hosea calls the Malak. So when he says, the people reading the story are in on a little secret. When he tells Esau, your face is like seeing the face of an angel, this is a fresh thought for Jacob. Because he's just seen a Malak. And it's such a joy, right? So you get the kind of the hidden behind the scenes story going on there. But again, this word face goes on and on and on. Now, what we're doing now in the story, setting the stage for the encounter that begins in verse 23. And I'll give you this idea. Remember, he sends his family across the Yavok, across this brook, and gets them separated into these 2 camps, and he's left alone. And it says in verse 23, and he took them and sent them over the wadi, and sent over that which he had, and Yaakov was left alone, and there wrestled a man. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the dawn. In Hebrew, it says ish, a man. He's wrestling with a man. Hosea calls this man a Malak. Now notice, he doesn't prevail against him, and the Malak touches the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Yaakov's thigh was put out of joint. The Hebrew indicates that it's sort of hanging, like it's out of socket. This is a painful injury. Jacob will limp for the rest of his life because of this injury. All right, now, the interesting thing is, the Malak says, let me go. He's in for a fight here. Jacob won't let him go. And he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Now this is, when I read this story, whoever this is that he's wrestling with, Hosea 12 is interesting. When we factor in, if it's just a man, you think, well, Jacob, he's a good wrestler. He's wrestling another guy, and he hangs on until the guy blesses him. But Hosea 12 seems to indicate that it's a little bit more than what we think, all right? So he says, what is your name? He's getting ready to bless him, and he said, Jacob. And the Malak, or he said, it says, and he said, your name shall no more be called Yaakov, but Yisrael, for you have contended with God and with men. In Hebrew, im Elohim ve'im anashim, because you have struggled with God, with Elohim, and with anashim, with men, and have prevailed. And Jacob asked for his name, and he wouldn't give it to him. And then verse 29, part B, and he blessed him there, and Yaakov called the name of the place Peniel, for I've seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. This is a big deal in the Hebrew Bible, as you know, this idea of encountering God in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Now, there are the religious police out there going, it wasn't God. It was not God. No one can see God. According to the Articles of Faith, it's no corporality. You can't see it. But the Hebrew Bible does have some very intriguing and mysterious encounters. Generally, the Malak is involved whenever we encounter one of these hard-to-explain encounters. But he does. He demands a blessing from the one with whom he wrestles, and the character development of Jacob takes a turn. All right? The one who was known as a supplanter, a deceiver, a trickster, is also, we're told, is a fighter. He's been a fighter from the womb. Right? We tend to think about Jacob post birth, but even in the womb, remember, when Rebecca has these problems with her pregnancy, she's told by God, there are two nations in your womb, and they're like beating each other. Now, I want to touch on this idea of seeing God, Elohim, Panim El Panim in Hebrew. This literally translated means face to face. He, Jacob, not me, not Ross. I'm not imposing a theology on you. Jacob, after this encounter, says, I have seen God, Elohim, face to face, and my life is preserved. So, there are 4 other passages in the Bible which use this phrase. Go with me to Exodus 33. In Exodus 33, we'll see one. Same phrase in Hebrew, by the way. Now, I'm not getting into the derivatives, the other forms like pei el pei, which means literally mouth to mouth. I only want to talk about this particular phrase in Hebrew, panim el panim. Exodus 33, 11 says, let's go back to verse 10. Verse 9, see, it's hard to start. And it came to pass, verse 9, as Moses entered the tent, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tent, and one talked with Moshe. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the door of the tent. And all the people rose up and worshipped, every man in his tent door. And Jehovah spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. Panim el panim. Now, you go, oh, that doesn't mean what you think it means because you can't see God and yada, yada, yada. I know, I've heard. Okay, I've heard it, but here's what I'm reading. What does that mean? The Hebrew is as clear as the English. He spoke with God. Or literally, God, Jehovah spoke to Moses face to face. You know, like a man speaks to his friend. Like John. Hey, John. Hey, Pam. Hey, Dave. Hey, how you doing? That's what it says. All right. What does that mean? Don't know. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 34. Deuteronomy chapter 34. This is... obviously, at the end of Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 34. It's talking about Moses. Verse 10, chapter 34, and there rose not a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom Jehovah knew face to face. Panim el panim. It's this very special relationship. In the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, it says that Moses beheld the image of Jehovah. All right? Now, again, it doesn't fit your theology. Well, I am just so sorry. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. This is a strange encounter. The one with whom Jacob wrestles. But we're not finished. Go with me to the book of Judges. Let's see if that's right. And chapter 6. Let's see. Okay. You remember in this particular story, Gideon, if you look at the context, verse 20, Judges 6:20, and the angel of God said unto him, this is the Malach HaElohim, the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened cakes and lay them upon this rock, pour out the broth, and he did so. And the Malach of Jehovah stretched out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire rose up out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. Malach Jehovah departed out of his sight. And when Gideon perceived that he was an angel or a Malach Jehovah, Gideon said, alas, O Jehovah Elohim, because I've surely seen a Malach Jehovah, panim el panim. Notice the next verse. And Jehovah said to him, peace be to you, fear not, you shall not die. Now I know that some of you, your theology does not match this. It just doesn't. So either you need to tweak your theology or don't read this verse ever again. Something's going on here. All right? And then there is one more. Go to the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 20. This is a redemption text. Ezekiel chapter 20. And I'm just going to read verse 35. Ezekiel 20, verse 35. And I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples. and there will remonstrate with you face to face, panim el panim. As I remonstrated with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Egypt, so will I remonstrate with you, says Adonai Yehovah. All right, so this is at the redemption, and the idea is that there is this encounter. Now, what we have to understand is what's going on. Now, a lot of people will say it's the idea of a shaliach. In Hebrew, it's the agent. He's not God, but he represents to such a degree. This is your standard textbook answer. Everybody says this. The interesting thing is that they are associated very, very closely in the communication between them, both in terms of designating them as Yehovah, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, as the Malach, Elohim, the Malach HaElohim, all of these different phrases. What I'm saying is that there is a very mysterious presence with whom Jacob wrestles. And from this point forward, things change for Jacob. Now, by the way, after this match, he doesn't die. So he's surprised by that. Because how many verses in Scripture say, no one can see my face and live, and so forth and so on. All right, so when one encounters this mysterious malach, it is very interesting. All right, now, the struggles that are so evident in previous stories of Jacob, the struggles that are so evident in Jacob's struggles previously sort of dissipate now. He becomes more of a passive figure. Things happen to him, but he's not the stirrer that he was. His life has changed forever, as you can imagine. He is no longer what he was. When Jacob left home, he took with him the birthright and the blessing. Upon return, he seeks to bestow a blessing on Esau. And you're like, well, can he do that? This story, directly below the surface, is the idea of blessing. He's coming back. He has the blessing. Esau is the one he stole the blessing from. He wrestles with the malach. He asked the malach for a blessing. Won't let him go until he blesses him. And then we have this story of Jacob pushing Esau into accepting a blessing from him. And finally he does. But again, I want to stress that Jacob doesn't make excuses for Jacob like commentators do. What Jacob does is he works towards reconciliation. That's his goal. Our patriarchal narratives begin with a single man who grows into a family and then into clans and then into a nation of tribes. But the events surrounding the latter are discernible in the life of the former. So in other words, when we talk about the patriarch, we can see, if we look closely, details that are relevant for the nation of the tribes of Israel. A long exile will change the character of Israel. Right? Known initially as one who supplants and takes from others, will one day be known as one who brings with him a blessing. Think about the promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. You're going to be blessed, but be a blessing, and through you all the people of the earth will be blessed. So the one who originally was known as the taker of the blessing will be known as a bestower of blessings upon the entire world. having learned lessons, Jacob, having learned lessons, having striven with both God and with man and prevailing, will ultimately find his destiny, if you will. Some people don't like that word. I mean it in the sense that his end goal blessing is to bring blessing to others. There is a face-to-face encounter that is coming for Jacob's descendants. I just read it in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 35. This restoration, if you will be an encounter not unlike that which Jacob had, I believe, and not unlike those that are mentioned elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. At that time, when this encounter happens, I have to wonder if Jacob's prayer wouldn't sound similar to what the patriarchs, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, Jehovah, who did say to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will dwell with you. I'm unworthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant, for with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I'm become two camps. See, when Jacob comes back, he's coming back home as two camps, just like the patriarch. We are not in a united kingdom, but Israel is divided into two camps today. You know, it's almost like the words of a love story that are in my mind. Israel is to be united with her God, if you will. Israel will be a restored one, prepared, having been in exile, for restoration to the land that was promised to them all along. When they come back. Now, we still have idols in the camp, I'll tell you. We're not to that point in the story yet. There's still idols in the camp. But I want you to go with me to Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. What will Israel look like when she returns? What's that going to look like? Song of Songs is a love story. It's an allegory, if you will. It's believed to be an allegory between God and his people. And in this love story, we get clues, we get pictures, we get a glimpse of what that reunion is going to look like. So I want you to look with me to, in Hebrew, it's chapter 7, verse 1, but in the English, I think it's chapter 6, verse 13. I just want to read this. Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon you. What will you see in the Shulamite? As it were, the dance at Mahanaim. The dance at Mahanaim. Now, what does this have to do with the love story in Shir HaShirim? What does it have to do with the ultimate redemption? And what's this mention of Mahanaim? Notice a few things in our song here in Shir HaShirim. In Hebrew, notice it says return 4 times. Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon you. Why is return called out 4 times? And what does Shulamite even mean? Shulamite is, if you look it up, it generally is thought to mean the restored one. And the return to, that we may look upon you, the call to return is given 4 times. I believe that God is calling for the restoration to the 4 corners, if you will, to which his people have been scattered. Remember the dream of Jacob in Genesis 28, when he dreams about the ladder and he's told your descendants will spread abroad to the west, the east, the north, and the south. So the 4 returns are return, 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 so that we can look upon you. And what would it look like? The dance of Mahanaim. This puts us back into the Jacob story. Jacob represents, for obvious reasons, the patriarch himself. Throughout Scripture, as Hosea did in chapter 12, throughout Scripture, his story becomes our story. His story becomes the story of his descendants. The idea is expressed very clearly in Hosea 12, where it says, there he spoke with us. So think about those things. We still have more to discover in the life of Jacob that points towards the greater redemption, the return of Jacob's descendants from among all the nations into which they've been scattered, the return to the land. So we're still not finished with our story of Jacob. We've got more to go next week. So Shabbat Shalom. We'll take a few minutes and we'll set up and we'll post another link. So stay with us.